Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to dive into the really dramatic history of how English kings started losing absolute power.
Right, and how the first real form of representative government was born from all that conflict.
Yeah.
It's a foundational story.
It really is. You have to go back to the 13th century where you have these incredibly wealthy, incredibly angry people basically forcing their kings to share.
Yeah, so let's set the stage.
Mm.
After the Norman conquest in 1066, the king in England, well, he truly owned everything.
We're talking absolute power. Imagine a ruler who doesn't need your permission for anything. Not for taxes, not for laws, nothing. That was the reality.
Totally. The king owned all the land, he enforced his own laws, and he collected taxes pretty much whenever he felt like it.
He had advisors, right, but he didn't actually have to listen to them.
Not at all. It was his call. And this creates this baked-in tension in the system. If the king is too demanding, especially with money, the powerful nobles start to get restless.
And that's exactly what brings us to the first huge limit on that power. It happens in 1215 with King John.
King John was famously bad at his job. He'd lost a ton of territory in France, and he was constantly hitting up his barons for more and more money to fund his failures.
So the barons finally hit a breaking point. They literally forced him to put his seal on a document we now all know.
The Magna Carta. And what's so wild is that this wasn't the king having a moment of generosity. This was a surrender.
Right, basically at sword point.
Exactly. But the idea it established was genuinely revolutionary for the time, that the king himself was not above the law.
That concept alone is just, it's mind-blowing for the medieval world. But what did it actually change, practically speaking?
Well, not for the average person, not at first. The protections were mostly for free men, which, really meant the barons and big landowners.
So it limited the king's power to just seize property or throw people in jail without a proper trial?
Right, what we'd now call due process.
Mhm.
But the part that changed everything, it wasn't about rights, it was about money.
It's always about the money.
It's always about the money. The Magna Carta said the king could not collect any new taxes without consent. To get that consent, he had to consult his great council.
And that's the power of the purse. Why is that one idea so powerful?
Because it forces the king to negotiate. Before, he just took. Now, if he needs cash for a war, he has to go to the barons and ask. And they can say, sure, we'll give you the money if you fix these other problems we have.
It flips the whole dynamic. But, signing a document is one thing.
Following it is another. And many kings just ignored it. Which brings us a few decades later to King Henry III.
And Henry III, he kind of makes all the same mistakes his grandfather, King John, did.
Oh, yeah. First, he's obsessed with these super expensive foreign wars that are just draining the treasury. And second, he surrounds himself with foreign advisors.
And that second point is huge. The English barons, who are supposed to be the king's main counsel, they feel completely shut out.
Totally insulted. They're paying all these taxes to support the king's foreign buddies and their foreign agendas. It was a perfect storm.
They realize a signature isn't enough. They need a way to actually hold the king accountable for his actions.
And this is where our main character steps onto the stage. Simon de Montfort.
De Montfort's story sounds like it's straight out of a movie. He's a French nobleman, and he's married to the king's sister.
He's Henry III's brother-in-law. So the civil war that's about to break out, it's a family feud.
With the whole country on the line.
Exactly. And de Montfort was charismatic, he was a brilliant general, and he truly believed the king should govern with a council's advice, not just on his own.
So in 1258, he leads the barons, and they force Henry to agree to a new, much stricter set of rules called the Provisions of Oxford.
And these were radical. I mean, this was a bold attempt to just take the king's executive power away completely.
How did they do that?
They set up a council of 15 members to oversee the king's entire administration. All his decisions, all his spending, it had to go through them. Henry couldn't do anything on his own.
It's a total removal of his power. And they also made him promise to hold regular meetings, right?
3 times a year. These meetings, which they started calling parliaments, were meant to discuss the state of the country. It institutionalized the whole idea of consultation.
But you can guess what happened next.
Of course. King Henry hated it. He tried to cancel the whole thing, which immediately kicks off a full-blown civil war, the Barons' War.
And this leads to a showdown in 1264, the Battle of Lewes. And the king's army was much bigger.
Way bigger. But de Montfort was a military genius. He pulls off this shocking victory, and he captures them.
Captures who?
Both King Henry III and his son, Prince Edward, the heir to the throne.
Wow. So de Montfort is now the unofficial ruler of England. He has the king in a cage, and he can finally build the government he's been dreaming of.
And this is where he does something that changes history. This is the Parliament of 1265. De Montfort knew he couldn't just rely on a few rich barons for support. He needed more buy-in.
So he sent out invitations to this parliament, but not just to the usual suspects.
Right, not just the earls and bishops. For the first time, he invited representatives from the towns.
Specifically, 2 knights from every county.
And, this is the revolutionary part, 2 burgesses from each major city or borough.
Okay, what's a burgess?
Think of them as, like, city representatives.
Yeah.
Wealthy merchants, influential local officials. They weren't nobles with titles, but they held real economic power in their communities.
So why invite them? Was he some kind of early Democrat?
It was more of a brilliant political move. These were the people who actually paid a lot of the taxes. By inviting them, de Montfort gave his government legitimacy. He could say, see, the people who pay the bills have consented to this.
It was a way to build a bigger coalition against the king.
Exactly. And it proved that a government could include voices from different parts of society. That meeting is the blueprint for what would eventually become the House of Commons.
But as you said, revolutions can be short-lived.
They often are. De Montfort started acting a little too much like a king himself, and some of his allies got nervous.
And then the king's son, Prince Edward, escapes from captivity.
Right. And Edward was very capable. He raises a new royal army, and in 1265, just a year after de Montfort's big win, they corner him at the Battle of Evesham.
And it's a total disaster for the rebels. De Montfort is killed on the battlefield.
Viciously killed. The royalists wanted to send a very clear message.
So the man is gone, the rebellion is crushed. But his idea, that couldn't be erased.
No, because it was just too useful. Prince Edward was smart. When he finally becomes King Edward I, he remembers the lesson he learned.
That fighting the country's power players all the time is just exhausting.
And bad for business. He realized it's way easier to govern and way easier to collect taxes if you have the formal cooperation of the people you're taxing.
So in 1295, King Edward calls what we now call the Model Parliament.
He literally copied Simon de Montfort's format. He desperately needed money for wars in Scotland and Wales, so he invited everyone, clergy, nobles, knights from the counties, and burgesses from the towns.
By getting their approval for his taxes, he basically stabilized the whole political system. It became a regular thing.
And as these parliaments kept meeting, they started to split up.
They physically separated into 2 different rooms.
Right. The big guys, the great barons and the bishops, they formed one group. This became the House of Lords. Their job was still to give high-level advice to the king.
And everyone else, the knights from the counties and the burgesses from the towns, they formed the other group.
That became the House of Commons, representing the local communities.
And here's the kicker. The House of Commons, the commoners, they ended up with more and more real power.
Because they held on to that power of the purse. They were the ones who had to sign off on the king's money.
So the king couldn't fund his wars unless the commons said yes.
Which meant the commons could make demands. They could say, we'll approve your taxes, but first you have to pass this new law we want. It gave them incredible leverage.
So that's the final structure, a 2-house system. What do we call that?
It's called a bicameral system. Bi for 2, camera for chamber. New laws had to be approved by both the Lords and the Commons before going to the king.
So no one group could just run the whole show. It created a system of checks and balances born out of this brutal fight over money and power.
That's it. The whole struggle fundamentally changed how government works. It established the principle that a government needs the consent of the people it governs.
And the idea that laws get debated, that budgets are decided by representatives. You can trace it all back to those chaotic meetings. It took a civil war and a rebel general to prove that real power often lies with the people paying the bills.
It's a pretty powerful lesson. Every check we have on government power today was hard-won, starting with a fight over who got to decide where the tax money went.
So next time you're learning about how your own government works, you can remember it all started with a handful of angry nobles who finally forced their king to the bargaining table. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Good luck with your studies.